Are you sure you want to stay here? It looks creepy.
But Savannah, this
Now entered the House of Mystery on KKNW 1150 AM, Seattle. The best in true crime, conspiracy, and history with Al Warren and Kev Thompson.
Oh, welcome back to the House of Mystery on KKNW 1150 AM, Seattle. I'm your host, Al Warren, and of course there's Kevin.
Lurking in a corner.
Lurking. Troublemaker is always lurking.
Yes. Yeah. Peeping.
Peeping Kevin, not peeping Tom. Well, here we go. We're going to do, this is turning into a Jack the Ripper month. You know, we've had the Mudget for H.H. Holmes. We got John Borowski, who made the documentary. We're just doing it all.
Yeah, it's a ripperthon.
Yeah, somebody's ripping. Okay. Now, but today we have an incredible guest. We're glad he could join us. Now, his book is called The Strange Case of Dr. Doyle, and it's a journey into madness and mayhem. And he's written it with his father, and he is a Dr. Daniel Friedman. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Alan.
Not a
it's
problem.
It's a real pleasure to be with you today, especially in the Ripperthon.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah,
hey, it is October. It's Ripper month.
Yeah, it's not Oktoberfest. It's a Ripperfest.
And it's kind of funny because the Ripper murders actually were in August, September, but they skipped October and went right to November. So we're going to add the Ripperthon right in between that missing month.
Well, that's good. It keeps people busy, so they're thinking. Well, he must have stopped for Halloween then.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a national holiday. You can't kill on that day.
Yeah. No. Well, you think that would have been a great day because of all the screaming and people dressed up, they wouldn't have noticed.
You know, that's a valid point. I know we're saying that in jest, but that's a valid point.
Yeah. Remember that next time you're going out to hunt people. Well,
I'm gonna start doing it on October.
Kevin or Keller. Now, let's get to the book. Now, you know that really caught my eye because everybody knows, of course, Sir Doyle from from Sherlock Holmes, and some of his other writings too, which have made it to movies and stuff. So he was quite the writer. What do you know about Mr. Doyle?
Well, I can tell you a lot what I learned about Mr. Doyle, or Dr. Doyle in this case, as I was going through medical school. See, I love Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as a writer. It's one of my favorites. But when I found out that he was a physician, which coincided with my time locked up in the library in my medical school, I decided to read a bunch of articles that would come into magazines like Science or JAMA or even Nature. And you know, I actually thought they were going to be about his days making brilliant diagnoses on his patients or how he used actual patient cases to craft his Sherlock Holmes stories. But these articles were nothing like that at all. They were just so strange and bizarre, and each one more than the next. Like the first article was about his involvement orchestrating the Piltdown Man hoax, so the missing links. And another article was about how he went onto a train, onto a boat, and then another train to get to Germany to embarrass Robert Koch, the greatest scientific mind of his time. Then he had this rushed medical school thesis that he did, and it was all about syphilis. And then just a couple months later, he writes this article about locking away all women that are thought to have had syphilis into these special hospitals. So I was left with a totally different impression about Doyle at this point, and that he kind of lacked any kind of remorse, that he had a propensity to perpetrate gigantic hoaxes, that he was willing to go out of his way to ambush and embarrass people, and that this disease, syphilis, was definitely on his mind. And I just knew that there was something not right with him, and I set out to find out what it was. And I unlocked a lot of these, these doors of what he was doing, but there was a certain time frame between the ages of 25 and 30 that they just were like bolted shut. I couldn't open them. And I knew I needed to figure out what was on his mind. And then I ordered this book called The Doyle Diary, and it was through that book, which had nothing to do with Arthur Conan Doyle. It had all to do with his father, Charles Doyle. And once I read that book, I was able to unlock all of those doors, and I was able to identify not only the motive, but also the identity of Jack the Ripper when I did that.
Wow. How did you start on this journey? Like, what made you focus on Dr. Doyle?
Well, I mean, as a pediatrician, I follow the growth and development of children and adolescents, and I know that what happens in your life as a young child. Where do you go to school? Who your parents are? Where you travel have an influence on what happens to you in your future. And I wanted to find out what was making this guy tick. And let me tell you, everything I found out about him was just mind-boggling. When he was a little boy, he was in street gangs. And, yeah, he was a street fighter. And this is when he was 5 and 6. But it wasn't like he was in a gang with 5 and 6 years old. He was with a gang with older children. But he was labeled the champion, and he would go out there and fight the older kids. That's how tough this kid was. When he went into, he was then, at a very young age, also at age 4 and 5, he was kicked out of his house by his mother to protect him from his abusive father, and put into a house of his mother's friend, Mary Burden. And I could just imagine he was only a half mile away from his parents' house, and he couldn't even see them. Then he gets cast away to school in Stonyhurst College in England, where he was told under no circumstance could he come home during the winter holidays, and the teachers there would beat him every day. Other people that went to school with him said he got beaten more than any other kid. And I'm just going, this poor boy, he's being abused. And then came this clue I found, which relates to Sherlock Holmes, where if you read the first story from on the Sherlock Holmes canon, which is the study in Scarlet, the clue that they use is the clue Rach. And I read this letter that he wrote to his mother at age 13, which says, Professor Crea tried to kill me today, and he tried to strangle me. He was yelling, Doyle, 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 you stole her from me. You stole my lover. And it occurred to me that Crea is an anagram of the word Rach, which means revenge, and it's the clue in the Sherlock Holmes tale. And he was telling his mother that I know that something is going on with you and Dad, and you're having an affair. And what the coolest thing is, the story he writes to his mother about the derature is written by the author whose last name is the same as the person she was having the affair with, a 20-year-old lodger named Brian Waller. And she had 2 children with him. So I said this poor kid was really mentally and physically and emotionally tormented. And that's when I went back again and I started to research everything about him.
Wow. So what led you? Like, what was the first clues or the first things that happened that you came across that all of a sudden made you look at Conan Doyle as being Jack the Ripper?
Well, the first things were that the articles I read in those scientific magazines were all very bizarre. And the Doyle Diary had this thing about his father, and the artwork was very bizarre too. And then I decided to contact the mental hospitals that Charles Doyle, Arthur Conan Doyle's father, was put into at the age of 42. His father never got out. His father died inside the mental hospital.
Wow.
And the medical records indicated that his only physical finding, the only thing that he had wrong with him, was an absent knee-jerk reflex. That was it. And anybody without a medical degree would just going to say, okay, so he didn't have a knee-jerk reflex, no big deal. But the truth of the matter is that if you read Conan Doyle's medical school thesis, which he wrote in 1 month, he wrote this a medical school thesis, he's talking about a PhD thesis here, in 1 month, at a time when he was taking care of his future wife's brother, who he accidentally killed, by the way, and the police investigated him. He was able to, and he wrote this thing in 1 month, which was brilliant. He actually writes that if you have no knee-jerk reflex, that means you, by definition, he called it pathognomonic, but by definition, you have syphilis. So I'm realizing that his medical school thesis is on this topic, that his father doesn't have the knee-jerk reflex, and then right after he writes his thesis, he writes that article to the paper saying that all women that are thought to have syphilis should be locked up in these hospitals and, for months and months at a time until they're deemed clear of the disease. And I realized then that Doyle really had syphilis on his mind. I started to research all of Doyle's, letters home, things that he wrote to friends, and it appeared that starting at age 10, Arthur Conan Doyle was having these neuralgia pains of his jaw, these claudications, which is also could be a finding of syphilis. And he was getting electroconvulsive therapy for this at the time, and it was the things are just bizarre. What was going on with his life. He was so scared. He was in the hospital, in the emergency rooms of his school. And then later on, in his medical school thesis, he writes that he's taking a very high dose of a medication that can be used to combat the signs of syphilis. And then, of course, it dawned on me, why would he be taking such a high dose of medicine that's only useful for syphilis if he didn't think he had it? So at this point, I was able to come up with the idea that he must have thought he had it, and then I went back again and I saw that he had taken this medicine called jasmine root for his headaches, and he got sick with that too, and he almost died, and the person he was working with had to really, bring him back to life. And he was also taking another medicine for his skin to treat a rash that he called psoriasis. But as a physician, I know that the rash of psoriasis can mimic syphilis, and he would have known that too. And that's where things started to, I ended, and I tried to go forward into 1887, 1888, and even his biographer said there's really not a lot of information about what he was doing at the time. He was lost. They didn't know what happened to him. And that's where I had to go track him down. So, of course, I find out in 1887 he joins the Freemasons, which is a very prestigious organization. And at that time, it was full of lawyers and doctors and politicians and police officers. And he was in it. And not only did he join the Freemasons, he actually was able to rise to the rank of a third degree in less than 2.5 months, which is a meteoric rise. I mean, it's lightning fast. Mm-hmm. And I said, why would he need to do this? Because he really didn't write about the Freemasons in his writings. I mean, he mentioned them a little bit, but he really didn't need to join them. And I read what he would have to be initiated, the initiation rituals that he had to perform. And one of them happened to be it's a symbolic play where you basically take out a person's guts and you put them over the left shoulder and you take out the heart. I mean, it was very reminiscent of what you see written about the Ripper crimes. I said, wow, that's a very interesting thing that what he's doing here matches up to the Ripper things, because I knew a little bit about that, but I didn't know much. And I started to go back again. I said, you know what, but I know Doyle's not the Ripper. Come on, you gotta be serious. Arthur Conan Doyle, he's not him. I said, let me just exonerate the guy right here and there. I said, he would have to be able to rip someone up in pure darkness in like 5 minutes. And then, of course, I find out that in 1881 he was a whaler and a sealer on an Arctic voyage for 6 months out of the north of Scotland. And on that journey, he was hired to become the ship's physician, which was a duty he did not do. He basically went out with the crew. He was sealing every day he could. He was whaling every day he could. And at the end of the trip, the ship's captain said to him, "We want you back next year. We don't want you back as a ship's doctor. You're the best sealer we've ever had." He could strip a seal of its skin in less than 5 minutes. You're talking about this is a major thing. You have to take off, cut the animal in half, take off the skin. He would be able to bash their heads in with a club. The guy he could do anything. This guy, and
Dan, Okay, Daniel, let's take a breath here for just a minute, because you have said a lot, and I want to unpack it. I want to go back and revisit some of the points that you've made. Let's go back to the syphilis and his beliefs that perhaps, women with syphilis should be isolated in special hospitals. As a doctor, and thinking with the mindset that they did back then, would that have been so out of place?
That's a great question. And the original article I read by Doyle, yes, it was out of place. It was about the Contagious Diseases Act, and it was really not. It wasn't very politically correct. But then again, 1 week later, the person in charge of the lock hospitals in Portsmouth, where Doyle was working, wrote a letter saying that Dr. Doyle lied about his findings. He called Doyle a liar in this article. He said that everything he wrote is false, and Doyle had to give a written retraction a week later and apologize for what he wrote.
Oh, wow. Well,
yeah, and that doctor was Frederick Banks. So if anybody's listening, they want to look it up. It's the article a week later in that magazine from Portsmouth. That's for Frederick Banks. And I realized that, Doyle must have been very hurt by that. That statement, being called a liar in front of everybody, having his reputation a little bit tarnished with that, and his message now being looked upon as being the wrong message.
But
so
Daniel...
he couldn't get these women off the streets just by, putting them into hospitals.
Sure.
That wasn't going to work. Yeah, it wasn't going to work anymore.
But let's be intellectually honest here. If they were still studying syphilis and they weren't sure, the studies weren't concluded yet, why not isolate them until we know what this is? Kind of like we did with tuberculosis, which back then was known as consumption, and other diseases. Now, I'm just kind of high-centered on that right now.
Right, because what you're thinking is that, you walk around with the signs of syphilis, but the truth is, the truth of the matter is that so many people in Victorian England society did have syphilis. Either they knew it or they didn't. Men and females. It goes to everyone. And children. You can be born with it too. It's congenital. You can, mom has it. She passes it to the child. Mm-hmm. What he was saying is he was singling out the prostitutes. He wasn't saying that people with syphilis should go into the hospitals to protect people. It should be the prostitutes on the streets that should be put away. So he wasn't saying that we should be helping mankind out. He was just basically targeting people. And the targets were, at this point, people that could have given his father, in his mind, was the prostitutes, the syphilis, and that he thought he had too. And that's when I wanted to look up to see the Jack the Ripper victims and their ages. And that's the person that really shocked me. Because I'm thinking, who would Jack the Ripper target? Would they be these young 16, 17-year-old girls who ran away from homes, tried to escape from a dysfunctional family? And then, of course, the ages come out. First victim is age 43. Second victim, age 46. Third victim, age 44. Fourth victim, age 48. These are like old women.
Yes, women that may have been around the block a time or two.
Right, or around the block, like say 25 years ago when they were young, and those are the women that his father would have gone with. The age would fit. So I said he wasn't picking them out for himself, because he would have picked out an 18 to 25-year-old girl who was only 29 at the time of the Ripper crimes. He's looking at, a young guy. He was only 29.
I get it now. I get it.
The revenge, everything is that revenge. The first Sherlock Holmes story, again, he had made sure his father, illustrated the book. He was in a mental hospital. He went up there and said, "Your dad, you have to put the Sherlock Holmes character wearing a navy coat, and you have to make him look in a certain fashion." He wanted things exactly the way he saw this character, not what the deerstalker had and everything, but he had certain things in mind for Sherlock Holmes, and he wanted his father to be a part of it. This revenge story of like two Mormons. Of course, Mormons will have to have, at this point, relationships with more than one woman. That was part of the religion at the time. It's not the same anymore, But back then, that's what Doyle was reading about, the Wild West of Utah and this new religion that was out there.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just to make sure that I understand this correctly, because now that you've explained that, I'm starting to see the tie-in. His father was suffering from syphilis.
That is what I can gather from reading the medical charts of Charles Doyle. Yes.
And we all know that syphilis can affect the brain, can cause, for lack of better terms, insanity. As evidenced with Al Capone.
Yes, and not only that. Remember, the father was incarcerated for basically being insane. Seeing birds as evil creatures, that he saw them as giants. He was afraid of them. He would see ghosts and fairies and sprites. And in fact, you got to remember, Doyle went out of his way to defend these two teenage girls in the 1920s when they said they took photographs of sprites, and they were just cardboard cutouts.
I remember that.
Yes, and Doyle was a master photographer. He had a column in the papers when he was only in his early 20s about how you can fake a photograph. And one of the things he writes in his Lost World story is, faking a bone is as easy as faking a photograph. And meanwhile, he goes out of his way, puts his name on the line, defending these two girls about the Kathleen fairies, and he knew they were fake. The girls confessed to it. The girls couldn't believe, actually, when they were in their 80s, they wrote this confession saying, we couldn't believe Arthur Conan Doyle actually bought our story, so we couldn't turn ourselves in and say it was only a hoax. Because he believed in us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, did he do it because he wanted to prove that his father was sane? I mean, I don't know what his real logic was, but that certainly was one of my things I was thinking, was that, if his father believed in fairies and sprites, and he saw them every day, I can prove the existence of their world. With these two girls, they have the photos, and it was so fake, and they were so phony. They even tell us what book they got them out of, too. This is great.
But, so, he suffered at his father's hands, with mental illness. His father was abusive to him. And so perhaps, and I'm just making sure that I have this clear, he did possibly the murders out of rage that he suffered at his father's hands from suffering from syphilis.
I would say that would be a pretty good summary.
Okay, now let's roll. I just want to make sure that I got over all the speed bumps.
Yeah, you're pretty good. There are other issues in there too. With Doyle suffering from something himself, like a dementia paralytical too, or did he have something going on at the same time where he had to get something out, that he had to get it off his chest, off his subconscious, and once it was done, and once his mission was completed, like playing out the entire hieroglyphic play that the Freemasons do, which is the killing of 3 people in a symbolic fashion, could he finally go on with his life? So that could be a part of it too. You read something and it hits you, and you have to just kind of act on it.
Now, out of fairness, have you studied Masonic ritual?
No, I read their book. I shouldn't say I read their book now. I read the books from the 1860s and 1870s. I read the entire play that he had to be initiated with. Mm-hmm. I learned all about Charles Warren and his involvement with the Freemasons, and a possible connection of why one of the clues was washed off the wall on Goulston Street, because Charles Warren, who was the chief of police over at the Metropolitan Police, was also the head of the Freemasons. And he's actually known as a historian. He actually started the library of the Freemasons in London. And he would have known that the clue that was written on the wall had a Masonic message to it. And, of course, he wouldn't have wanted the Masons to be looked upon in any way except for being great. You had the kings in it. You had the kings, doctors, physicians, police chiefs are in it. You don't want to bring down an organization.
Okay, I can understand that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. You got one rogue guy doing something. You don't want to bring down an entire organization for one rogue,
Now, unless I'm mistaken, one of the only tie so far, throughout these shows that we've done on Jack the Ripper, the only tie to the Masons was allegedly on the wall near one of the victims was written the word jubilum.
Well, it wasn't really Jews, it was Jews. And that was a whole court case. I don't know if you know this. If you read the papers of the day, the spelling of the word was so important One guy had it written as Juwes, another one had him as Jews, and there were many variants of the spelling. But yes, the spelling that came out at the end would have linked it to the Masons, and that was washed off the wall immediately. Remember, what they could have done is taken a photograph of it, but they didn't. That would have been easy. Take a photograph and wash it off. You could have erased one of the words, the word that you would have been afraid of, but instead the order was erase the entire message. It scared someone enough that they got rid of the entire clue very quickly. Someone knew.
Yeah. But, it leads me to the same question that gets asked a lot is, so if Doyle did it, why did he just do it for such a short time, like less than a year, and then stop? And he lived till 1930. So
exactly. Well, yeah, as I said, I think what he had to do was he had to commit the three. The four were committed. I mean, the canon is 5. I don't think the fifth murder was part of the Ripper crime. A lot of people don't either. It's not my theory only. But I think he had to commit the 3 murders, but the third murder went wrong. I think he was about to be caught, and the only thing he was able to do on that victim was to cut her neck. Liz Stride's neck was cut, and that was it. But that doesn't complete the ritual, because her guts weren't taken out, and they weren't set over the shoulder. It wasn't done properly. It wasn't done to completion. So on that same night of September 30th, he had to go out and get one more victim and complete the ritual. And once that, because only 3 people were killed during the Masonic ritual play. So he had to do 3 murders to get that ritual completed. And once he was done, the revenge was over, and he would have felt that he avenged his father, and he could go on with his life, which he did.
Then what was the purpose of him doing some carving on them? Is that part of the ritual, like removing parts of their body and
Well, the ritual is to do certain things with the heart, the lungs, the liver. I don't know if I've seen anything with the eye, but Doyle did become an eye doctor. He did little dissections of the eye. And that was another thing that is one of the things I had to look up, too, was how did the Ripper see in complete darkness? He didn't pick areas which were well-lighted at all. In fact, murder number 4 was carried out in the darkest area of an alley, away from all the light sources. So you have to picture, and he was doing those little dissections of the liver and taking off a piece of the kidney of his victims. He had to be able to see. Mm-hmm. So you need a guy who writes about doing this. Other people are putting in people like you mentioned H.H. Holmes and people are talking about Maybrick and we're talking about Walter Sickert, but do they know how to see in the dark? That's the thing. But Doyle writes about it. See, when Doyle was in Africa as the ship's physician on the Mayamba, he actually wrote an article to the British Journal of Photography saying that I'm taking photographs on board the ship, and I needed a dark room, and I don't have one. So what I did was I took my red muffler, and I put it around my lantern, and I was able to create a light source that wasn't too bright, that would ruin my plates or photography slides, but I was able to see well enough that I could develop the film. So, of course, when you read about what the Ripper was wearing, which when he was spotted, was he wore a red muffler around his neck, something that Doyle used to use his darkroom light. So you have the red muffler for Jack the Ripper from the witnesses, and you have Doyle writing about that for his experiment to develop photographic plates in a room that's supposed to be a cabin that he converted into a makeshift darkroom.
Wow.
Makes sense. Kind of, yeah.
So what kind of things...
Sure.
I was just going to say, what kind of things... why can't it be someone like H.H. Holmes? What's your theory on that?
Because you got to remember, a serial killer doesn't really change his motive. That's the thing about that. What motivated, H.H. Holmes, let's say, to carry out his evil deeds was financial gain. It wasn't revenge. His methods of execution ran the gamut of, locking his victims in airtight vaults, poisoning them with gas, subjecting them to, brutal torture. H.H. Holmes derived special enjoyment from hearing the screams of his victims, and once they died, he would dissect them of some of his victims, that is, and sell their body parts to medical schools for money in a fashion similar to that of Edinburgh's infamous body snatchers, Burke and Hare. H.H. Holmes lured his victims to his, what he called his castle, which had like these rooms that had ended in like blind alleyways and stuff, so you couldn't even get out. And he also did it with like seemingly legitimate employment advertisements in local newspapers. The man, H. Holmes was a sociopathic con man, and he also would take out large insurance policies on his female staff, and he would name himself their sole beneficiary. But the Ripper didn't do that. See, Jack didn't care about money, and he was selecting his victims prior to killing them out in the open on these highly trafficked streets of London's East End. He didn't do these things indoors. H.H. Holmes did his stuff indoors, away from the policeman's eyes. The Ripper was walking on the streets saying, here I am, in the middle of the night, by myself, and I don't care if my victim screams, and I don't care if you see me, because I'm not afraid if you confront me. If you confront me, I will kill you. But the odds are you're never going to see me, because I'm going to be out of here. And that's what happened. He was able to commit his murders right out in the open street. One of the first murders was right in the open street. And the police were so baffled, they thought that he must have taken a cart, because, like a Lando cart, and dropped the body off. But it wasn't the case. He killed that woman, Mary Nichols, right there on the spot where she died. He opened up her dress, ripped out her guts, put everything back, put back her stays of the dress, and walked away. Cut her neck, walked away. No one saw the guy. H.H. Holmes would never have risked himself being seen by anyone. He was too afraid.
And now you also mentioned about the handkerchief that was left at all of the murder sites. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the handkerchief is one of the things that really... There were a lot of things that I really wanted to find out about, and that was one of them. Because I'm under the impression that the Ripper used handkerchiefs symbolically at these crime scenes. And I'm getting that from William Shakespeare's tragedy Othello, where the title character gives Desdemona a handkerchief as her first gift. Iago manipulates these handkerchiefs so that Othello comes to see it as a symbol of Desdemona's faith and chastity, and then goes ahead and takes advantage of it, and he converts it into evidence of her infidelity. So I think the Ripper was using these handkerchiefs as calling cards. And giving hints. He's giving a hint to the people looking for him, saying, here's a handkerchief. If you can figure out that this is a symbol of these women's infidelity, what they did to my father, you'll be able to figure out one of the parts of my motive. So, in my book, I give you better insight into what it's about, but I think it relates to William Shakespeare's tragedy and how these handkerchiefs represented a woman's infidelity. And there's another one, too. The thimble, and this is a great one. There was a thimble left not on the finger of the fourth victim, but it was next to it, and it was planted there. So I thought about Doyle and his associates, and one of his associates was James Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. And if you remember in Peter Pan, Wendy gives a kiss in the form of an acorn seed to Peter Pan, and Peter Pan gives Wendy a thimble as a sign of a kiss to her. So having the thimble left off the hand is a sign of infidelity, too. And I just don't know where he got it from. Did he get it from Barrie, or did Barrie get it from Doyle?
Isn't it amazing, Daniel, the smallest details? And here's why. Back in college, when I got my psych degree, I had to do a term paper on serial killers. The one thing that has been missing throughout all of our interviews so far about Jack the Ripper is a signature. Most serial killers, and I say most just out of safety, have a signature, something special that they do that means something to them. And now you've got me chasing this rabbit, Daniel. The handkerchief,
which were brought up in the court cases on multiple days. By the way, the courts knew the handkerchiefs were very important. They were doing deposition after deposition, case after case, on why they were there and exactly how many there were. And in fact, this is something that people may not know, but Thomas Coram found, I should say, a handkerchief wrapped around a knife the night after the murder. It was planted there, and the policeman who walked by it didn't see it at first. Then a horse flipped over in the middle of the street for no reason, and then the handkerchief was found. So I got to tell you this story, because this is one of the things that got me going with Jack the Ripper and Doyle. When Doyle was just starting out in practice in Portsmouth, his brother Innes would take out a, with the rock, and you would pull it. What's that called again? Like a little, you pull it. You pull a rock with a rubber band. But he had that
slingshot.
A slingshot. He would take the slingshot, hit a horse. Doyle did this 3 times, went to the paper, and in his diary. Hit the horse with the slingshot rock. The horse would flip over. The guy would fall off. Doyle would run out there like a hero and take care of the guy and tell his brother, run down to the newspaper and write this up. Have him write it up. Doyle saves the man outside of his office. And I said, wow, Doyle would do this with his own patience. And I'm wondering if Doyle was out there with that slingshot, hit that horse, had the man fall off the horse, and then was able to get to that stoop and leave the knife with the handkerchief on it as a calling card.
It's kind of a Munchausen by proxy here. So
yeah, on that one. With the brother. Exactly.
But now, to make sure that I'm establishing a signature here from what you're telling me, was there a handkerchief involved in all the murders?
Everyone. They had to know, did that handkerchief belong to the victim or did it not? And that's what the cases were about. They could not figure out if that woman had the handkerchief before or after. They had to know, did the Ripper leave it behind? And in most cases, no one could remember the woman having a handkerchief like that. They thought they were planted by the Ripper. That would have been his little gift, so to speak, or his signature.
Because it's usually something so small.
That's pretty small. Carried in your pocket.
Wow. Now, you are the first one that has brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. When I did this, I didn't want to leave any empty theories. I didn't want to say, Doyle had superhuman vision and could see in the middle of the night. You can't say that. Well, you could say it, but it won't work. Or, you can't just say he was able to get a horse to fall over with magic powers. You have to say, you have to find something in his writings, and it can't be fictional here. It is real diary writing saying that I knocked over a horse today with a slingshot, and I got another patient.
I don't know. We used to go cow tipping when I was a kid.
Yeah. Well, there is a story with Doyle with cows and cow mutilations and how he defended the guy, but that's another topic.
Oh, we never mutilated him. We just knocked him over.
No, this is cow mutilation. There's another story with us. Doyle got the guy off the hook. It was great. But yes, these are the things that I had to find, and that was certainly one of the items that I wanted to make sure I just didn't leave an empty theory with. Another thing was, with paper, a lot of people out there were saying that, back in the 1970s, a bunch of ripperologists looked at this painting and were under the impression that what they saw in this, titled painting, which is "What Shall We Do to Pay the Rent," was that it was painted by Walter Sickert, and the paper was on period paper, and some of the Ripper letters were on period paper too. So, you have this big theory out there, and you have people going out there like Patricia Cromwell saying the Ripper had to have used period paper, and therefore, if my suspect doesn't have access to period paper, well, then I'm left with an empty theory again, and I would have to exonerate Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and I would have. But this is what I found. I found undeniable proof of a relationship with Doyle, because his favorite medical school professor, which is William Rutherford, with the exception of Joe Bell, but Rutherford became Professor Challenger in his Lost World stories and a portion of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he really loved this guy. Well, Rutherford was his vivisection professor in his secret lab, and if you read Rutherford's textbook of pathology, on page 11, you will see that Peary demanded that all of his students use the smooth but not too highly glazed antique notepaper made by Peary and Son. And so, again, not only was Doyle one of his students, but he would have also been using that paper in his secret vivisection lab. And just so you know, the vivisection experiments that he was doing were very similar to the murder number 4, because on murder number 4, he actually took samples of the patient's liver, and Doyle was cannulating the livers of these dogs, and of course, cutting open their windpipes and putting cannulas in them. So whoever, the Ripper was, knew how to cannulate the liver, which Doyle knew how to do. He said, I worked for Professor Rutherford, and know how to cut open windpipes, which, of course, he did on these dogs. And, of course, he did the experiments in the lab, and he also was an Arctic on voyages where he was sealing the seals, skinning the seals, and he was also a doctor. So he has all the credentials. And that's why other people like, Walter Sickert, he's an artist. Did he know how to cannulate a windpipe? Did he know how to take liver samples? Would he know how to take out a kidney? Now, these are the things. A kidney, to you and me, in our minds, you just go in there, you open the body, and you just take out the kidney, right? The kidney is a very difficult organ to find. You have to know exactly where it is, and it's hard to get to because it's in the back, and it's hidden underneath the guts. And the Ripper was able to take out the kidney by opening the front of the abdomen. But when you do it, that was only really taught at the time because it was a new science using anesthesia to intubate people. That was done mostly from the back. Even today, when we take out the kidney, we open the people up in the back. But in Edinburgh, they were doing it from the front, and that was the technique that Doyle would have learned. So, again, whoever our killer was had to have possessed that knowledge. And if you look at some of the autopsy reports, if you're under 5 minutes of time, when you cut open the abdomen, you're going to go right over the belly button. You're going to just cut right through like a linear line, just straight through like Zorro would have done. But the Ripper avoided the belly button. He circled around it like a surgical technique would have done. So Walter Sickert and H.H. Holmes would have not been trained in that method of going around the belly button. They would have gone straight through like you and I would have probably done. I may have done it because I saw it a couple of times in the operating room. But Doyle would have known to go around the belly button to make his operation easier. It just shows you that the Ripper had some surgical skills. And that's what the coroner said, too, that the Ripper possessed surgical knowledge. But beyond a doubt.
Yeah. Well, what did he do with the rest of his life? He lived over 40 years past the Ripper killings. So did he do anything else evil or anything that you found?
Well, I will tell you this. He did, we've spoken about the fairies and the defense of the fairies. He was basically the self-proclaimed leader of the spiritualist movement, and he actually wanted to open up a kind of a church, which became his bookstore, within a stone's throw of Westminster Abbey. You got to picture that in his mind the competition with the church right there in front of you, and he's trying to make a new religion. So he actually really thought he was going to be the head of this very, it would attract so many people, his religion, the spiritualists. And he also had dealings with Harry Houdini, where his wife tricked Houdini into thinking that she was talking to his mother, and she wrote this 14-page letter with a cross on it, and it was in perfect English. But, of course, Houdini's mother did not speak English at all. And Doyle wrote in his book on fairies that when you speak to the dead, you actually speak in their language. So Houdini knew that book well and knew that the letter should have been in the German language and not in English, and was very upset with Doyle. He also, of course, wrote The Lost World and the Brigadier General series, and he brought back Sherlock Holmes after his stint in South Africa during the war as a propagandist. Doyle basically was given his knighthood in 1902, coming up October 24th, actually, in 1902, because of his involvement of trying to popularize England's actions in South Africa. It wasn't that he didn't get the knighthood because of his Sherlock Holmes stories at all. You got to know those stories those Sherlock Holmes stories kind of make fun of the Scotland Yard police. You got this guy sitting in a chair, basically in the beginning, and he's able to figure out all the clues that the master detectives of Scotland Yard cannot figure out. He's always one step ahead of them, kind of like the Ripper was. The Ripper was always one step ahead of the police. He wasn't caught. He always was able to get himself out. He was basically never really seen up close. He was a master of orchestration. The Ripper was, and so was Doyle.
Well, what do you talk about what the Ripper wore, and that his clothing was not like the top hat and kind of how he's portrayed in movies.
He wore a navy peacoat. Of course, this is August and September. It's pretty. I'm sure you need a coat in August and September in London. And and he sometimes was associated with a black shiny medical bag in some reports, and the other reports have him with a red muffler around his neck. Of course, the red muffler, I assume, was worn by the Ripper to make a light source that would not act as a beacon and draw attention to the Ripper while he was committing his murders. Because, if you put a lantern out, and even in an alley, people live in these alleys. And in that fourth alley, there were night watchmen at one of the factories, or people there that were once police officers and that. So you can call attention to yourself, and that was the best advice he had at the time.
No. So what do the Ripperologists sort of say to you, or what's the response been to your book?
Well, first of all, Paul Begg, after he read my book, gave it kudos. And he's the editor of the Ripperologist magazine, and he said it was the best bibliography he's ever seen. And he invited me, and it's actually published right now, he actually invited me to write an article for his magazine. It's out this month.
Oh, okay. And
he actually embraced it.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it was very good.
So what have you heard that's been negative?
Well, of course, you're talking about Arthur Conan Doyle being the Ripper, and that's not going to be taken lightly by the Baker Street Irregulars or the Sherlockians or the Doyleans out there.
Yes.
Although I've been going to their meetings, and I haven't been stoned. I'm working at it live. And but you have to remember also, when I did this research, I wasn't looking for Jack the Ripper. So and my publisher, Square One Publishing House, is going to be doing another book of mine, which is the 15 short stories I found written by Arthur Conan Doyle under a fake name. And, of course, when I said that I found 15 stories, the first thing I got back from the Sherlockians were, "We know all the stories, and you found nothing." I said, "Would you like me to send you 3 of them?" They said, "You can send them to me just 1 because it's not him." I sent them 3, and I said, "These are verified Sherlock Holmes. This is verified Arthur Conan Doyle stories. Where did you find them?" I said, "I told you I found 15. If I can find out who the Ripper is, I'm going to find these things too." So that's the basis of my next book, will be these lost stories that I uncovered that were written under a fake name using a special cryptogram that I was able to decipher what he was doing as the Ripper. Pretty cool.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you ever have thoughts on the Shawl and the Russell Edwards and that whole thing with Catherine Eddowes?
With the DNA, the problem was, during medical school, I did a little bit of genetic research myself. And it's very hard. What they had there, the mitochondrial sequences, too much of the population had that sequence. And the one they had originally would look good, but then it wound up being another one, and it doesn't fit. It would have been great because it would have ended my book right there, and I wouldn't be on the phone with you right now. But no, it didn't pan out, unfortunately.
Yeah. So that Shawl just went for
the
2.9 million.
sequences just didn't match up.
Yeah.
Millions. It's worth millions.
Yeah.
Kind of like the blue dress.
Yeah.
Exactly. I see it this way, and other people see it as orange or green. Exactly. There's too many people have that genetic code, so it just doesn't work out.
Yeah. And Maybrick Diary. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this new diary that was that's been found supposedly. See, what happened is in 1992, this diary was found by this electrician underneath some floorboards in this apartment that supposedly belonged to James Maybrick, a cotton merchant from Liverpool. Now, Maybrick was arrested for poisoning his wife. So, again, I know Kevin's very good at the serial killer analysis. And, again, serial killers don't change their M.O. So this guy's a poisoner by trade. Of course, the diary is found, and they go through it, and it looks like it's about him being Jack the Ripper, and it talks about the murders. But then Michael Barrett, the guy who found it, made a sworn affidavit confession that he actually made it up to all himself with his wife, and he actually told people where he got the information from. Like, he took it from Punch Magazine for this page, and he took it from this newspaper for that page. But then he, of course, someone must have said to him, "Why don't we make money off of this?" And he basically retracted his statement. And I think they're making like a Netflix or something out of it on TV now, or because things will sell. But then again, as I said before, the MO is wrong. And does this cotton merchant have enough knowledge of surgery? Does he know how to operate in the dark? Would he have been brave enough to go on the streets, knowing that the entire police force of London has now been recruited into Whitechapel? You have the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee after you. You have amateur sleuths after you. You have rewards of £500 from this guy, £50 from this guy. If you capture the Ripper, you're going to be a rich man. And Whitechapel is very, very poor area of London. Everybody was out trying to get this guy. I don't think a guy from Liverpool would have been brave enough to go out there in the streets and try to say, I'm going to go kill someone out in the open in 5 minutes and get out of here. So, again, he doesn't really fit the M.O. Doyle, on the other hand, knew the East End docks. He was staying there during his college days. He would visit his uncles and aunts for months at a time. He would say, I was at the Albert docks. He knew them well. At one point, he was so depressed, he actually was going to get on a boat at the docks that were in Whitechapel and head out to Brazil, I think, to work there as a doctor. So he knew the area very well, which is very surprising because actually later on in life he said, I never set foot on Baker Street up until like way after the 1900s. But he actually writes about being at the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum when he was only 17, which was like in the 1860s, 1870s, and that was on Baker Street at the time. So he knew he was there. It was just a way of saying, I'm not there. I don't know London. But he really did. If you look at his letters and his diaries, you know he knew London well, very well. He was there for months. As a matter of fact, he was doing insurance policies and working for the Gresham Assurance Agency, which was located only 0.7 miles away from Whitechapel.
Where is the book found? I guess at Barnes & Noble and, of course, Amazon.
Sure, you definitely find it at Amazon. I always do my thing on Amazon.com because I get my Prime delivery. They mail it for free. But you can even call my publisher, Square One Publishing, or go on their website, squareonepublishers.com, or I think the number is 516-535-2010. Yes, that's right. I'm doing my mind here.
Fantastic.
Still doing like the little touchstone thing there in my mind.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about your book. The book is called The Strange Case of Dr. Doyle. It's a journey into madness and mayhem. And our guest has been Daniel Friedman, M.D.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me today. Kevin and Alan, thank you so much.
This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you. I have enjoyed this immensely.
Me too. I really did. I had a great time on your show today. It was fantastic.
To find out more about our show, guests, or listen to a previous show, visit our website at www.somethingweirdmedia.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.